Okay, welcome back everybody to Stuff That Matters Now. I am on a journey today talking to Stu Pearce. Kia ora, Stu.
Kia ora.
And I haven't met Stu before. Lara's got me into this. And she's got you into this, Stu. So let's make the most of this opportunity. And you've worked with Lara in the Air Force.
Correct, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, how long ago was that?
Oh, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's been a wee while since we were both in uniform together, but yeah, good times.
Excellent. So, Stu, who are you?
Okay, who am I? So my primary role at the moment, I'm serving in the Royal New Zealand Air Force. I work at our Air Staff headquarters in Wellington, and I'm the Director of Air Force People and Culture. When I'm not doing that, in my spare time...
Hang on. Director of...
People and Culture.
For the Air Force?
For the Air Force.
A director?
Yeah.
So this is quite a big role, Stu.
It is, I suppose. But I think one of the interesting things about being in the military is we tend not to sort of bubble up to the top, and the levels that we get to... It doesn't feel big, but I suppose maybe perhaps from the outside looking in it might be. But it's certainly a role I don't underestimate, and it's I'm very happy and quite humbled to be in the role. But it's it's an interesting job.
We'll get into that soon. Sure. And you're gonna say the next piece.
Yeah. So my spare time, I'm a little bit of an advocate for wellness, and I run a small sort of personal training and coaching sort of side hustle, really because, again, it's that sort of connection with sort of people and culture, but using it to combine my own passion for fitness and training with helping other people and lifting them up as well and helping them achieve their goals. So, yeah.
Is that something that you've always been into?
I think that being in the military, I've been in for almost 25 years now, and I think I've always been sort of physically fit. It's always been a very sort of physically demanding kind of role, certainly in my more junior years. But over the years, I think my journey sort of up through the ranks, and as I've sort of transitioned from a sort of trooper to an office dweller, I think that's a transition that sort of I think many people in sort of the business world can kind of relate to, and we tend to kind of slow down and become a little bit more office bound. And so my fitness over the years has taken occasionally a bit of a backseat, and been able to sort of claw that back a little bit and use my experience and my learnings in that to try and sort of encourage other people that sort of just because you're a business executive or you've got a busy day job doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your health and wellness as well. So,
but we do.
We do, yeah. The dad bod culture is alive and well, and a sort of personal crusade of mine is trying to encourage guys my age, our age, that just because we're getting older, just because we've got a busy day job, we absolutely need to prioritise our health, because that allows us to perform much better at whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah, just a correction there, Stu. We're not the same era. Okay, thank you for pretending that. And it's interesting, Stu, because it's been first 30 years of my career was as a farmer and sheep and beef farmer on hill country, and it's an interesting role that sometimes, certainly when I was younger, keeping weight on was difficult because you spent a lot of time walking on hill country, and four-wheelers came along, and that wasn't good for our health. Our health deteriorated when they came along. Bad for the lower back. Obviously, it kills a few people and injures people as well. But that transition was really interesting. So a lot of my early years I was pretty fit, and I've been through bouts of going to the gym. Don't like running, and right now, so I'm in my 66th year now, and it's a fucking issue for me to try and find that motivation, And over the weekend, something twigged in me, and that I was planting trees over the weekend. It was full 2 days planting and digging and so forth. and I loved it. I love the feeling that the body been working. So I like drinking alcohol consistently, and so I'm going to take on the dry July. Oh, I've said it now. And yeah, it's been interesting, the kick I've got.
I think what you're describing is something that a lot of guys our age and perhaps above can relate to. I think there is that sort of sense of that seeming inevitability of everything kind of slowing down and kind of getting weaker and everything else. But if we can find a way to hook into some kind of activity that gives us that sense of actually we can be optimistic about the future, that actually, next year I'm not necessarily going to be weaker or frailer or less healthy. Actually, next year, if I carry on this path, I'll be stronger and more able and more agile and more resilient. And I think, for all of us, I think when you look at the impact that has on not just us as individuals or even on our family and our whānau, but also on the wider community, the healthier and fitter we can make our people, the less of an impact that has on the health system, the more resilient our communities are, the less dependent we are as we age. There's that great line around, use it or lose it. And too many of us, we think that we're getting frail because we're aging, but we're aging because we're allowing ourselves to get frail. So finding some kind of activity, whether it's physical work on the section or joining a gym or taking up a sport or something like that, can have really profoundly positive impact.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been a long time since I've felt those endorphins. And I've got a wonderful GP, and she said recently, Harv, you've put on 1 kilo for the last 2 years, right? So that's 2 kilos. And I was like, cool. And she went, no, it's not, because if you carry on like that, it's going to compound. And I'm like, oh, crap. So initially I thought, this is good news. And it was just a very subtle thing, and it stuck. And I don't want to live a long time and be unhealthy. And I don't want to live a long time and not be active. So there you go. It's that struck over the weekend. So tell me, you are into also competition.
Yeah, which again, I kind of got into quite late in life. I did my first competitive bodybuilding show when I was 42. Now, I've always been quite goal-focused, and around about 2018, 2019, I was just coming out of a role within the Defence Force. It was my dream job. I was the maintenance flight commander on our operational helicopter squadron just up the road at Ohakia, and I'd thrown myself into that job. So I was there at the crack of dawn. I was still there late in the evenings, and I was having my lunch at my desk. And by the time I left, my health and wellness.
How long was that role?
Probably about 18 months.
That'll do it.
And and I can remember one day walking into the bathroom and looking at myself in the mirror. Now, my father died at the age of 63, so relatively young. And I can almost remember sort of seeing my father looking back at me in the mirror and just having this realization that if I didn't make some kind of change, that I was essentially just following him down the footpath. So I reached out to a few friends and said, hey, look, I need something to aim for. I need a goal. I need something to get after. And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you do a bodybuilding show? And at the time, I just can't remember looking at myself in the mirror thinking, this is not the physique of a bodybuilder. But she was really encouraging and supportive. And long story short, I reached out to a trainer down in Wellington who got me on the path and started getting me training. And about sort of 18 months later, I did my first show, and it's been it's probably melodramatic to say it's saved my life, but it has certainly changed my life for the positive. Because one of the things that I found through having the structure and the discipline that the sport demands is this sense of optimism for the future. Every show that I've done, when I look back on my earlier show photos from my early 40s, when I was kind of thinking, well, it's just downhill from here, right? I'm just going to get older and weaker and frailer and less healthy. Now, every competition that I do, I can see improvement, despite the fact that I'm aging. And I go to these shows and I compete in the 40 plus Masters division, but there are guys backstage and women backstage who are in the the 50 plus, 60 plus, even in the 80 plus division. I remember being at one show, there was a guy who we were backstage pumping up to go on stage, and I got chatting to him, and I'd seen him doing his press ups with absolutely perfect form while Air Force PTIs were being pleased. And I got chatting to him afterwards and said, "Oh, how long have you been competing?" And he said, I did my first show when I was in my 40s. I thought, well, that's interesting, the same as me. And he goes, yeah, that was about 45 years ago. So this guy was mid-80s, and he was able to do, perfect press-ups for reps on the floor. And I just remember thinking that when I'm in my 80s, if I can get on the floor and get back up again, I'll be happy. I love the sport. It just kind of gives me something, it gives me optimism, I suppose, which is probably the most valuable thing out of it.
So here's the negative. Here's something I've seen it going to the gym, watching bodybuilders and looking at themselves in the fucking mirror all the time and going, "What a pack of tossers."
Yeah, and I think I felt that myself before I understood what bodybuilding was all about, and I think I always felt very self-conscious before I started specifically training for the sport with looking at myself in the mirror, because it always kind of gave the sense of I was just kind of admiring what I was seeing in the mirror, which was all very egocentric. With the sport, what I understand now is that we don't look at ourselves as a sort of a specimen of perfection. What we tend to be doing when we're looking at ourselves in the mirrors is actually being really analytical about what's strong, what we need to work on, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, and being quite critical about, so we're not showing off when we're posing in the mirrors.
So it's a complete opposite.
Absolutely. And I think what's really fascinating as well through the sport is it's really easy when you see these people with fantastic physiques, men and women, to assume that they are, some arrogant tossers who just, so many of the people I've met through the sport haven't, they've not always looked that way. They don't have amazing genetics. They haven't just been blessed with this amazing physique. Many people I know have some guys were, the skinny kid on the playground at school, and he decided to turn himself around and start lifting weights and realised that he really enjoyed the process and where it took him. We've seen women who have overcome, postpartum depression by getting into the gym and training, and now they're absolutely crushing it on stage. I remember going to a bodybuilding show. It was a NABBA show up in Auckland, and there was a lady who and NABBA did this great thing where they tell you a little about each athlete when they walk out on stage. Yep. And this lady was can only been about sort of 5'3", 5'4", and she walked out on stage and she looked like she was having an absolute blast. But then they introduced her and they said that this is whoever she was, and she's dropped something like sort of 55 kilos, and to be honest, she deserves to walk out on that stage to be feeling $1 million, because she's literally worked her ass off to get to where she's at. So I think there's that real risk of making those prejudgments of the people we see in gyms. Some of the biggest, there's a guy I know trains in Palmerston North, huge guy, he's got an amazing physique, one of the most humble, generous, encouraging, supportive guys you could ever meet. He trains with a real intensity, and when he's training, you just want to kind of leave him to it. But you get him talking about the sport that he's really passionate about, and all he wants to do is encourage other people into it and lift each other up. So you get a little bit more of that in the sport, I think. So.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll try and not be. It's just because I was also thinking maybe I'm just jealous.
I think that I think we're all potentially in danger of that, and I think it's that case of don't compare yourself to other people, but be inspired by what they're able to achieve, because you don't know the journey that individual's on, or where they started out. So and I think when you get to know people, it's hard to dislike somebody that you know.
Yeah.
It's easier to judge somebody that you see at a distance. So
okay, let's go there. Because it's interesting with our work at Collective Intelligence, in that we put difference together, and when people get to know each other, we have so much more in common than not. I think just about always. And it is here's a prime example. Farming. We've had people from the city go onto farms. So in the team there might be a farmer and they host people onto their farm for their host day and they come and visit. And without question, people say, oh my God, you really care about the animals. You really care about the environment. Like it's a surprise to them. And the farmers go, of course we do. We couldn't do our job if we didn't, if we weren't like that. Not all of them are like that, but 95% of them are. And yeah, and so it's an interesting thing with our work is to try and broach that gap.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a great, and I'm probably going to do her a massive disservice and misquote her, but Michelle Obama uses the line that it's really, it's hard to hate up close. And I think, I think it's human nature I think it's ingrained in us as a survival mechanism to be wary of things that are different, and to distrust. So when we're out in the society, in communities, if we see someone who has a different opinion or looks different or sounds different, then it's really easy to allow ourselves to be threatened by that. But then the moment that we switch the script a little bit and actually allow ourselves to be open to understanding somebody else's viewpoint, then we find out that so much more about them and their journey and realise actually we've got so much more in common. And I think, whether it's on the gym floor, whether it's in the farming community, that sort of conflict between, the city dwellers and the farming community and so on, actually we all want the same things. We all want our families to be successful. We want our kids to do well at school. We want to live in a healthy environment. We want opportunities. And that I think when we get to know people a little bit better, we understand the labels that we attach are tiny compared to the commonality and that sort of familiarity perhaps that we have with each other. So
I had an experience last year, and so this just popped into my head that it happens. And my wife and I went to veterinary practice after hours. We had a very sick cat, and we went into this veterinary practice, and the nurse welcomed us, and it was a stunning service and all good. And in walked this young vet, and he was dressed beautifully. He had these high boots on, sort of, I don't know how to describe it, very cool pants, flared jacket, didn't have a cravat, but he was fucking snazzy, right? And I'm just sitting here going, and I'm in my very casual gear, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking and going, mate, you are cool, right? And I was going to say something. I was going to comment on his clothing, and I thought, why would you do that? Just appreciate it, I don't need to say anything here. I can just sit here and enjoy this young man's energy and whatever. Because I thought I don't want to make him feel uncomfortable. Because if I draw attention to it, maybe will. So I thought I'm just going to sit here and enjoy it. And I thought in provincial New Zealand, how cool is this that we have? Because when I grew up as a kid, that didn't happen. That flair did not happen. And I just sat there and I was delighted with it. And I thought, this is a good sign. This is a sign that a community is vibrant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we're really fortunate here, I think, in this part of New Zealand to have a really vibrant, quite diverse community. And I think to me the measure of a healthy community is the amount of diversity that doesn't just exist but is empowered to to contribute. I can't help but think sort of how less successful, how less thriving this community would be if we all had to subscribe to one particular way of thinking or one particular way of living or one identity. And so I think I think that, and I always find it quite fascinating when you come into a community like this, it's quite a rural agricultural community, and again, it's really easy to have a preconception around what that's going to be like, and yet, scratch the surface, and we've got a really vibrant, diverse community of, school teachers and artists and musicians and accountants and engineers and military people and firefighters, and we all come together in the supermarkets and the gyms and the community events and the festivals and stuff. And when we allow that to happen, it makes for a really positive community that thrives.
And to be that they can dress and express themselves how they
Absolutely,
want.
yeah.
Because that was the thing that absolutely stood out with this young man. I just thought, oh mate, it was very cool. So tell me about this role you've got. Yeah.
In the Air Force?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been in the role almost pushing 18 months now. It's within the Air Staff headquarters in Wellington, and principally it's around shaping and owning the culture of the Air Force. So I'm not in recruiting. My job is not to try and recruit more people in. My job is about really supporting the lived experience of aviators within the Air Force, so that they have a full, rewarding, enjoyable and safe career. It's quite multifaceted. I've got an amazing team of outstanding aviators who are responsible from everything from supporting our employee network groups through to our mentoring scheme, the Turanga Waiwai up at our Air Force Base, and our Maori cultural group, and a whole raft of other initiatives in between that sort of really ultimately it's aimed to create an environment in which every single aviator in the Air Force can feel that they are valued and respected and can perform at the absolute top of their game. Because I think if they feel that way, if they are supported and they can, then ultimately that's safe for their team and that's safe for our mission. So,
what's an aviator?
So an aviator is it's a very military term. It's one that we've adopted that really describes anybody in the Air Force. We've moved away relatively recently from the term airman, because we felt that wasn't as inclusive as perhaps it needed to be. And I think when you look at the contemporary Royal New Zealand Air Force of today, we have entire crews of helicopters, that are staffed by women. We have women serving at the very highest levels of the organisation, and absolutely excelling across a range of trades and specialisations. So to use a slightly outdated term to describe them, we felt didn't really bring them along on the journey. So the chief has, championed the use of the term aviator, and it's been widely accepted as that's just how we see ourselves.
I like it. When I heard that, I thought it's. I thought this is not just pilots.
It's everybody.
It's everybody.
It's because ultimately, when it comes down to it, the Air Force, the military, we're a system of systems, and again, it's making sure that those constituent parts. I mean, just up the road from here, we've got our airbase, and most people will drive past it. They'll see the new hangar that we've got. They'll see the orange tower. But they probably don't have a real appreciation for the diverse skills and talents of the people that work behind the wire and get to know us a little bit better. Again, this is kind of going back to that sort of preconceptions about who we are.
Yeah.
But when you get to know who we are and what we do and the way that we do it, it's fascinating the variety of people that we've got. And what we need is for all of those people to be absolutely excelling.
And I look at where you've come from. My father had a friend who was a pilot in the Air Force in World War II. Had the handlebar moustache. No, it wasn't a handlebar. Had a bristly little moustache, and he was very dapper, and he was very military, and he was a bit of a dick, but he was such a pompous bugger, and it was just. So look, and look, he might not have been like everybody, but that was the stereotype of the Air Force back in the 1940s. And you've come a long way since then.
Oh, absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I mean, if you spoke to groups of Army or Navy or Air Force, we all have perceptions of each other. But I think where it absolutely comes, or where we come into our own, is when we work together as a cohesive team and it's really something quite spectacular. We've got a big exercise happening at the moment over in Australia, which is a national multi-agency exercise, but when you see us at our best, working side by side and cohesively, Air Force helicopters deploying on board a Navy ship with Army personnel performing a joint mission. It's a thing of beauty when you see the machine kind of come together and perform.
So these are, I'm going to call them disciplines. That's not quite the right word, but you've got the army and and so they're aligned.
Yeah, very much so. When we operate, or certainly when we're in our training space, we routinely train, sort of alongside each other to make sure that when we do need to operate together, for example, if there's some kind of an emergency here in New Zealand, as we've seen with the Kaikoura earthquake and events like that, that's when you see the Defence Force really sort of come into its own, and the unique skills and specific skills of, say, Navy, Army and Air Force collectively create an effect that's greater than the sum of their parts, I would say.
This term inclusivity, this is the new term. Tell us more about that. What does it mean to you?
So inclusivity it's a word that's sort of weighed on my mind for a number of years, and it's we often use inclusivity when we use the term diversity, and we tend to use those two words together. Diversity, to be clear, has always existed. We have always had diverse organisations, diverse communities, diverse defence forces. What perhaps we haven't always had is communities and organisations where that diversity can thrive. And so for me, inclusivity is about providing an environment in which every single member of that team, regardless of how they identify or who they are or where they come from, feels not just part of, that they're physically present, but that they can make a contribution, that they're supported and empowered. And to my point around, sort of, if every member of the team feels included, then they can perform at the top of their game. And if that's the case, then that's ultimately leads to a successful mission or to a successful community or a successful business. It's around, if you've got elements, I tend to think of organisations, communities as systems, a bit like a sort of Swiss watch, I suppose, and a Swiss watch will be incredibly accurate as long as every single cog, every spring, every component part is doing its job well, whether it's a big cog or a small cog. But if one of those isn't, then that system isn't going to work as well. And I think the same goes for businesses, for organisations. And so my journey with the Air Force, or with the Defence Force, has been to try and as much as possible, create a community within the organisation that is as inclusive as it possibly can be, whether that's for members of the Rainbow community, or Maori aviators, Maori service personnel, Pacific Islanders, Asian personnel, women, people with disabilities, whatever. Everybody has something that they can contribute and should feel proud of that. And if we can work together to create that sense of inclusivity, then we're well and truly on the right track.
Stu, the Rainbow community were not always welcome in the forces. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. New Zealand has been on a journey of discovery, if you like. We've had the Homosexual Law Reform Act back in the 80s. In the early 90s, we introduced the Human Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination on the grounds of a whole raft of human characteristics, of which homosexuality was one. But as you'll, I'm sure understand, changing policy, changing legislation doesn't change culture. And so we've been on a journey.
It's a good signal, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's very hard to change culture without a change in policy. And I think, for leaders, the first step is to enshrine into, a company's organisational charter or, some sort of policy book or whatever about this is how we're going to operate, and then culture will catch up. But I think, but it takes effort and energy to change a culture within any system, whether it's a company or a community or a defence force. And over the last, 15 or so years in the defence force, we've been on a journey, and for me, it's been really quite exciting to see the change that's happened in that time, and the positive change and the way that we've evolved as an organisation and our understanding. That's not to say that there isn't still work to be done. We're still we look to the future and want to continue to grow. But I think the Defence Force, Army, Navy, and Air Force should be really quite proud of how far it's come in terms of empowering all of its people.
What impact does it have on, say, the dominant group? So, for instance, I'm part of the dominant group, white male. What impact does this inclusivity of the others have on me?
That's a really difficult question to answer, because as not being a member of that dominant community, I haven't walked that path. What I think we have found is, and it's interesting that you bring up the role of the dominant community, because I think more often, or sometimes, what we tend to fall into is that we put all of our focus on the minority group, and that can, to a certain extent, disenfranchise the dominant majority. And we've seen this a little bit with the work that we've done with empowering women within the organisation. We have an amazing program called Wahine Toa, Strong Women, empowers and lifts women up within the organisation. Way back in the early days, there was a bit of a narrative from that dominant majority. Well, why don't we have something? What about us? And it's very easy to kind of dismiss that and say, well, you're the what problems could you possibly have as a white heterosexual male? But actually, there are a lot of challenges that white heterosexual males face, and males in general, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or cultural background. And so we've grown a program called Tane Toa, and it's specifically designed around providing spaces for conversations for guys to talk about things like mental health and physical health and sexual health and financial health, and it's a bit like the conversation around when we see that guy in the gym, it's very easy to kind of assume he's got his shit together. Yep. And he's just got amazing genetics and life is really awesome for him, but we don't know what's going on under the surface. And when we look at the stats around mental health here in New Zealand in general, there are some really important conversations that we need to be having with our menfolk. And so I think, what it does is when we talk about inclusivity, we've got to recognise that every part of the community has a part to play in that success, whether you're part of the dominant majority or whether you're part of a minority on the fringes. But I think if you exclude any one particular voice, you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, I would say.
Last week, I got some feedback. I got my ass kicked on part of my facilitation. And the feedback was absolutely on point, and I hope I learn from it. It's a repeated thing, and it's shown up in other areas, and it's the same pattern. And I've had training on receiving feedback and all that sort of carry on, but it's still hard to hear. And coming from the dominant culture, it's still fucking hard sometimes, because, and I'm not justifying my behaviour, when you trip up. And because I grew up for the first, I don't know how many years, 35 years of my life, I could do whatever I wanted and people would just tolerate it, or so I thought. And now the world's changed in the last 30 years, and it might have been more than that, I don't know, maybe I've just noticed in the last 30 years. And so here I am now and going, okay, so, I'm having to adjust. And it can be hard work sometimes. Now, I'm not saying poor me or any of that, But it's really interesting to just go, oh, this is hard. I've got to do work that I didn't have to do work before. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. And I'm trying to find a question in there, and I'm not.
I think I think again what you're describing. I think we're all susceptible to that kind of sense of we like it when we're in our sort of that sort of sense of security around things that we're familiar with. There's a great expression that people in the military. Two things that we don't like: change in the way things are.
Everything else is fine.
Everything else is fine. But I think it's one. I think nobody likes having their getting feedback that is a bit counter to where they feel, and I think in life one of the greatest talents any of us can have is to be coachable and the ability to kind of receive feedback, positive and negative. The other part of it as well is that we all have biases. We might not like to think that we do, but we do. And even those of us in minority groups have biases. And that's human nature. And again, that kind of talks to that sort of evolutionary, perception of people who are different to us.
Yeah.
Where we've, I think, made some tremendous bounds within my organisation is actually resisting the urge to be combative and to put barriers up when challenged, and actually to provide opportunities for conversations. And to that point around, it's hard to hate up close. It's, when you get to know, and this has been partly my approach throughout my career is that when people get to know me as an officer, as an athlete, as a husband, as just a regular guy in the street, that we have so much more in common than our separate statuses as members of different demographics might suggest. And if we get to know people and allow ourselves to get to know each other, and maybe perhaps be a bit honest with ourselves about why is it you think that guy with the muscles in the mirror in the gym is an arrogant tosser. And so, is it jealousy, or is it he's achieved something that I think I might not be able to achieve? But get to know him, and you might find that you're on a similar journey, and he's just a few steps down the path ahead of you, sort of thing. So, I think the journey of trying to create healthy, inclusive organisations starts with the willingness to have open dialogue and actually get to know people, and that's leadership, right? You can't lead people that you don't know. So,
what's the most important things for you in your job? What are the most important things for you to focus on?
I think for me, it's about making sure that everybody feels connected with who we are as an organisation. The world is a really interesting space right now. There's an awful lot going on. We've changed a lot socially and politically in the last few years, and the future is perhaps looking a little bit less certain than perhaps it was maybe sort of 4 or 5 years ago. So for me, in my primary role, it's about ensuring that every single member of my organisation feels empowered to succeed, that they can deliver what we need them to deliver in whatever role they may well be in. But I think beyond that, it's that sense of connectedness and engagement with the organisation as well, and with each other. And I think creating that kind of cohesive, resilient, safe community, because when we get that right, then everything else just kind of naturally falls into space.
How do you know if you're doing a good job or not?
Crikey, that's a very difficult question. There's two ways I suppose I could answer that. One would be the very easy way, which would be to say, well, hey, look, we do surveys. We have sensors that allow people to provide feedback, and we can gather data about sort of why people are leaving and the rates at which people are leaving, and feedback we get from But I think it's, and this absolutely goes against every grain of my engineering body. It's a sense, it's a feel. If you,
It's the vibe.
like, yeah, I mean, and you would have felt this. If you walk into a space whether it's a bar, whether it's a gym, whether it's a boardroom, whether it's you'll get a sense, of whether it's a great place to be, and like, conversely, sometimes you walk into a place and you think, God, this feels awkward. There's something here, it's just not clicking.
I wish we had a machine that could measure that.
Yeah.
Right, just
like a sort of Geiger counter that you just kind of walk in and starts beeping off the scale.
Just go, no, I'll move on.
Yeah.
That's not for me.
Yeah. We shouldn't underestimate gut feel, I think. I think our gut often tells us more than our brain allows us to. I think it's like any sort of relationship, So,
So just go back, because it's interesting. I've just ordered a book called Leader Healer or Healer Leader. I can't remember leader, and it's around taking less notice of the brain and more of the heart and more of the gut, and going. We need to recognise the intelligence of those organs in our body, because it can be very easy not to, and that our brain gets very busy and thinks it's no shit that the others don't. And so I love watching the struggle there as an engineer. Because I was hoping for something better, Stu. I was hoping for some magic metric or something that you had, but no.
It's I think we're very much a data-driven organisation. We gather a whole bunch of stats and we can trend and we can forecast. But this is the difference between, I suppose, management and leadership. It's like a manager will rely on stats and spreadsheets to understand the culture of their organisation, whereas a leader will just know instinctively whether it's a good place to be, and if it's not, a good leader will know how to change that.
It's a thing. It's because I'm fascinated in culture and I don't know a lot about it. Lara's way more versed and very conscious of culture and the ingredients of culture, and she's doing a great job with collective intelligence on the little things.
Cultures. So I had the opportunity some years ago. I was at an event and the Australian Chief of Army spoke, and I was chatting to him afterwards, and the topic of culture came up, and he described culture, and I think this is a great sort of way of describing it. He says, culture is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And if you walk into an organisation or a community or a business or whatever, listen to the stories that people tell. If people speak positively about the management or their co-workers, or conversely, if they don't speak positively, or if they, if it's authentic and that people have genuine pride in their town or their business or their their sports team or their whatever it is they're a part of, you can tell, I think, by the stories that are told and the way those stories are told. But I think it's being open to listening to that, and I think maybe that's where a lot of managers and leaders fall over, is that they're not listening enough. They're thinking too much perhaps, but not listening. Maybe.
That was gold. Thank you, Stu. For me, right there, because we're doing some work at the moment with an organisation on their culture, and 12 months in, somebody said, I'd like something more tangible. I went, cool. So next time we're together, I would like you to tell a better story, develop that. And I've been working with them to get them to tell stories. And it's a bit mystifying for some of them. And going, no, the stories we tell, make a huge difference. Yeah.
I think, if you went into any supermarket, you sat down with a rugby team, it's interesting in a way that positive culture doesn't necessarily mean that, you've always got to be the winning team. There are, I grew up in the UK where football, soccer, is a religion over there, and there will be people who will be so deeply connected with their club, regardless of how well they're performing or not. They will be loyal. They will turn up on those, freezing cold, wet, away games or home games and sit there and watch their team get absolutely blitzed by the opposing side. But regardless, they have this connection with the culture, and I think it's about the stories. It's what is the story of who, and the stories don't always have to be good either.
No.
But it's the way in which the story is told. It's that essence that we spoke about the Defence Force's journey. There's or New Zealand's journey. It hasn't always been a super inclusive, super welcoming space for every kind of person who might want to call themselves a New Zealander. But there's an awful lot of pride in this country as well now about where we're going, and when we achieve success, that's all of us, right? That's our national story.
It's an interesting thing for the Manawatu Rangitikei as well, is that we've got Ohakia there, which is developing and being invested in, and I think there is still a bit of a mystery as to what's going on over there, but I think there is also a lot of pride in the local community of going, this is in our doorstep, this is pretty cool, and some really high tech stuff is going on there, and so I think locally we could tell that story more, and develop that story more. You mentioned football. So I love tennis, and we're in a new era in the men's tennis at the moment. Also, they're beginning with this young woman coming through, Coco Gauff, who is a very good storyteller. We've got a new era now with two young men, a Spaniard and Italian. And the young Italian man in particular, Yannick Sinner, is a very good storyteller. And he won his first Grand Slam last year at Australian Open. And I don't know, maybe 21. It's insane. And he stood up there and he said, I wish everybody could experience the parents I had. They allowed me to play a whole raft of sports, and I developed a whole raft of love of lots of different sports and I thought, what a very healthy young man. And his parents don't come to his games. Often the parents are there because they've lived their life through their kid. But here we've got a kid turns up who looks really natural, and I'm going, and I think, here we go. This is going to be a fascinating journey. And he's got this other young man, Alcaraz, who is a stunning athlete, quite different. They're good mates, and Alcaraz beat him in the French Open recently, and Sinner said, this really hurts. I'm hurting right now. I had my chance. He had 3 match points in the 5 longest game in modern history, and he said, I'm hurting right now. Oh, this is wonderful. He's not pretending, he's not putting on a big brave face or anything or blaming anybody. It's just like, and I thought, this is going to be so good for the game, because these young men, I use the word healthy, they look healthy in mind, in spirit and body, and they have wonderful teams around them. Yeah, it's going to be, and I really noticed that.
I think what's interesting about that as well, when you talk about sort of healthiness, that it's, I think, an indicator again of a healthy space, a healthy environment, a healthy community, whether it's the tennis community or the supporting community or whatever. Because there is a real tendency, especially amongst our young men, to present success. Social media, everybody on social media is successful. No one ever posts pictures of when they look ugly or when they've failed or when they, it's always, everything is airbrushed and, made to look as though we are successful all the time. So if you've got a community or a culture in which, young athletes feel safe enough to put their hand up and say, actually, do you know what? I don't feel good about this. I'm not enjoying this right now. I'm not. I'm aching. I'm hurting. I'm not happy with where I'm at. As tough as it is to hear that, it's a bit like getting negative feedback. We want the sport that we love to be successful all the time, right?
Yeah.
So hearing that one of our best athletes is not having a great time of it, as tough as that is, I think that's a really positive indicator of the healthiness of the sport, where young men are able to put their hand up and say, do you know what? I'm not in a good space right now. I do need a bit of help, or I need a bit of a breather, or I need some coaching, or I need something to get back on my game. And I think, again, that speaks to, at a national level, around the conversation that we're having at the moment with men's mental health, with providing, a healthy culture isn't one in which everybody says they're fine. A healthy culture is one in which everybody who's not fine feels safe enough to put their hand up and say, do you know what, I need help.
Lara's brought this up as well, and that a healthy culture is not one where everything is a bed of roses all the time, that we have conflict and we disagree and we don't always get on. It's about what do we do when that happens. Yeah. And I think, having that, being able to recover from a dispute and so forth is like a physical fitness. The sooner we can recover from exertion is an indication of how fit we are. And I think that's the same with mental health, is that we all we hit the wall or we have conflict. It's about, can we recover from that and keep going. Yeah. Stu, there was something I wrote down before, which I smiled with, about a culture of not combative. And I thought it's slightly ironic that we've got an army and an air force that doesn't want to be combative. And I know exactly what you're saying, but it was just, I thought this is an interesting thing, because we're peacekeepers in New Zealand, right? Is that right? We've got a peacekeeping.
We have a mission to protect New Zealand and New Zealanders and our interests at home and overseas. But I think as a nation, we're not an aggressive nation. But I think it's safe to say that if, when the chips are down, we'll stand up for ourselves. And we're a small, plucky little country in the bottom of the Pacific. But, but when we need to respond to any emergency, we do it incredibly well. We're widely regarded as one of the most professional small militaries in the world. We're absolutely a respected sort of partner. And I think, when we go overseas and we work as we are at the moment with the exercises that we've got in Northern Australia with our friends from all over the place, we really demonstrate that capacity to step up and deliver when we need to.
Stu, before we started, I'm just switching subjects here. You talked around systems as the engineer. So what did you train in?
So I'm a propulsion engineer by trade. It's, but as an aeronautical engineer in general terms, an aircraft is a system of systems. The team of people that we have supporting those capabilities, those themselves are a system. So I tend to kind of look at the world through the eyes or through the lens of a systems engineer, and sometimes that works, sometimes maybe not so much.
And tell me about a system working in balance. What does that look like?
I think if we look at a system as a machine, take for example the human body. The human body is...
Oh, not that again.
Yeah, sorry, everything comes back to physiology now. But I mean, the human body is a system of electrical systems, hydraulic systems, pumping systems, chemical transfer systems. If any one of those isn't working 100%, you don't feel good, right? If you wake up or you're feeling just a little bit out of sorts, it's usually an indicator that something is affecting that system. That could be nutritional, it could be sleep, it could be stress, it could be sort of chemical, hormonal, whatever. the same applies to an aircraft. I mean, essentially all you need on an aircraft is an engine, wings, tail.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? But I think in more serious terms is that you've got this interconnected system of systems within an aircraft, and again, I mean, aircraft are designed to be incredibly safe and to have redundancy and systems that can step in if another one falls over. So possibly not the best analogy, but a community is a system. An organisation is a system. A farm is a system. If one element of your dairy farm isn't working as well as it needs to, if you've got everything else is working fine, but you can't get that milk off your farm to market, you're not going to be successful. If your business, if you run a supermarket, if your shelves are stocked with the best products, but your staff aren't working the tills or it's so you need every single element of that system to be working well. And I think where we've struggled, or where systems haven't performed as well as they should, whether it's an organisation or an individual or a human body, is when we've neglected one part of that system. And I think whilst I train as a competitive bodybuilder, you might think that my sole focus is solely on lifting weights, but if I only lifted weights, my cardiovascular system wouldn't be able to be strong enough for me to bounce back. I wouldn't be as resilient to recover as quickly as I want to, so I can get on to my next exercise. Same with an organisation. If you only focus on one part of that organisation, but the dominant majority of that organisation, but you don't support everybody else, then you might get by, but you're not really thriving. It's possibly a very oversimplistic perspective, but it seems to work for me.
You were born where?
Southeast of England.
And so coming to New Zealand and then provincial New Zealand, tell me, what was that like?
Do you know what? It was strangely easy. One of the things I've always found a bit interesting about the difference in English culture and New Zealand culture is that growing up in England, so many people, if you go back to Victorian times, many people would live in the big cities, the big smoke, sort of like very intense accommodation. So in English culture, sort of a place in the country is considered a bit of a luxury. That's the goal. That's the where we should go for.
That's posh.
That's posh. If you've got it, if you can holiday or vacation in the countryside, then because it gets you out of the cities and the dirt and the noise and everything else. What I love about New Zealand is that we don't think that way here in New Zealand. Going to the country that's the countryside is the sort of the machine of New Zealand, where New Zealanders want to be is on the coast. They want to be at the beach. They want to get out there and do their fishing. Poms, maybe not so much. But for us, I think that sort of move to provincial. I mean, we love the Manawatu. It's a beautiful part of New Zealand. It's green, it's open, it's clean. Communities here are welcoming and friendly. We built a house here, we put down roots, and our plan is to stay here for as long as we possibly can. And it's so the move here actually was pretty easy, I think.
Interesting. The interesting thing with Manawatu is it doesn't have this cool brand, perceived often from outside as being a bit bland.
I think that's probably our best strategy, because I think, do we really want, 5.5 million New Zealanders realising quite how good we've got it here in the Manawatu? I would say not. I think it's tempting to kind of think that the big cities have got the answer to everything, but the things that matter, connectedness, community, health, wellness, fresh air, spaces to get out and spend time with our friends and family. We've got all of that. We might not have Sylvia Park shopping mall, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. We certainly don't have the congestion. I love the fact there are no traffic lights in town. That I think is wonderful. and everything is within reach, right? You know, we've got a mountain where you can ski less than 2 hours drive away. We've got Wellington with its, you know, festivals and concerts and sporting events, you know, just down the road. Even closer now that we've got the, you know, the bypass and the, you know, transmission gully. So we're an amazing space to be, and yeah.
It's. I was in Auckland last week. Spent 4 days up there. I love Auckland. Love going to visit. Fucking love getting out of there too. So I came into fielding today and caught up with the team, and so I'm going, oh, this is so nice. This is so nice. And I had a bit of a cock up today. I brought my wife's vehicle in to town because I had a puncture to get repaired, and so I get that repaired, and I've realised I've left my podcast gear at home. And look, we live half an hour away, but I thought, okay, so I need to leave here at 11:30, and Lara said, don't be late, you know. You're special apparently, but I mean, no. But the thing is, I knew I was going to be back here with 15 minutes to spare. I couldn't do that in Auckland.
It's it's a pretty special place, and I think, you know, in, you know, the summers, you know, the weather here can be absolutely glorious. I mean, like I've mentioned, you know, my home is in the UK, and every now and then I'll get back and see my family, and you know, the UK is a country roughly the size of New Zealand, but with pushing 80 million people living there now, it is so congested. I love visiting my family, don't get me wrong, but you know, there is something really special about just having that sense of space and openness and connectedness with the environment. But at the same time, you know, it's very easy to look at a community like we've got here in Fielding and be quite dismissive and think, well, you know, we've got the stockyards and, you know, it's an agricultural town, therefore that's all it is. And yet, you know, again, get to know us, and we're a community of accountants and artists and musicians and personal trainers and engineers and aviators and farmers and, you know, shopkeepers. But, you know, we're a diverse community, and you know, when you go to places like, you know, the gym that I train at, and you get to know people, and you realise actually, you know, there's a lot of vibrancy and inclusivity in a town like this that perhaps people, you know, in the more metropolitan centres might sort of be not so quick to believe.
So the diversity and inclusion thing, right? It's not that cool right at the moment. It's sort of, you know, it's had a bit of a pushback.
You're absolutely right, and I think there's no denying that there's you know, some headwinds, I think, affecting where we're at, and I think, you know, the challenge comes, I think, when there is a fiscal argument that's made that doesn't recognise the value of inclusion. So, you know, we spend this much money on diversity and inclusion when we could be spending that on productivity. And that's a very compelling argument sometimes. I think, you know, at the end of the day, business exists to make money, not to just support its workforce. But I think what we need to continuously remind ourselves of is to, and it keeps coming back to my point around, you know, if every member of a system, whether that's a business, a community, an organisation, or you know, whatever, is feels that they can thrive and perform at the top of their game in whatever function that they might be performing.
Just going to stop you there. You've mentioned this a couple of times. Thrive and be at the top of the game. My pushback on that is that actually belonging somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, you know, for me, you know, a thriving family unit is one in which there's real, you know, respect and compassion and empathy within all family members. The same applies to, you know, if you're on a sports team, you know, you thrive if the forwards can perform just as well as the backs and so on. You know, if you're a crew on board an aircraft, you know, you need every single member of that crew to be feeling that they're not just sort of there, but they're able to perform their function to the best of their game. And largely that means removing all of the things that the distractions, you know, the things that are going to get in the way of us to be able to perform. If I'm anxious in an organisation because I feel that my boss or my workmates are homophobic or have disrespectful or whatever, it's very difficult for me to be 100% on my game. So it's but I think that's the challenge, and I think we need to, it sounds very sterile, but we need to continuously remind ourselves that there is a business case for inclusion, and I hate the expression, go woke, go broke, because I think it's just really lazy, but also the vast majority of really successful companies are ones that empower all of their people. Companies that have really struggled are the ones where they've got a culture of that's a little bit toxic towards certain groups or just toxic towards everybody. And I think making everybody feel welcome. I mean, if you went into a town where a quarter of the town's people weren't welcome, that's not a town you'd want to invest in or stay in or feel a part of. But if you just here in this building, before we met, I noticed there's a display around so pride. There's probably a very small slice of this community that really would benefit from that. But I think it's great that as a community it's there and it's visible, and that we're proud to embrace our diversity within our community. Get rid of that, and it makes us lesser.
And so, for the listeners, we're sitting in brand new, 80-month-old Fielding Library, and it's a wonderful structure. And I've never spent a lot of time in Libraries Street. I spend a lot of time in here. And I'm looking out the door now, and there's a Māori family out there. You might be able to hear them. They're having school holidays. They're having a bit of fun. And what I love about this here is just the sheer mix of people coming into here. It's wonderful. Sorry, listeners, I'm just choking here for a second. Hang on, I'm going to pause. Okay, we're back. I've got my little coughing episode out of the way. Stu, let's move on to, you used this term before, toxic. And I believe that any toxicity towards any group, it can be aimed at a minority or whatever. If that is exhibited in a community, that toxicity might be aimed there, but it infects the whole community. And that's my belief anyway. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those things that when you see it, you can kind of feel it within an organisation. But when there's a group of people who, for whatever reason, are being just even subtly sidelined. They're not being included in the conversation, or they're being, they might go to make a contribution, but they have their contribution dismissed, and that might seem incredibly trivial and low level. That's not the kind of it's not physical bullying, it's not physical harassment or anything like that, but it still breeds a culture whereby people feel that they can't contribute, or they don't feel that they want to contribute. And I think it's many people have seen this in organisations. The moment you start disengaging from the organisation, then you end up with an environment that just isn't successful. It's if you've got a player on your sports team who's just doesn't feel connected with the rest of the teammates, that team's not going to perform well. But at the same time, if you can address that, if you can create a team where and this I think is the secret of any high performing team, it's that sense of connectedness. But toxicity breaks the bonds of connectedness, and once those bonds start to fracture, then it's not long before the whole cohesiveness just falls apart.
We've seen that in our work with collective intelligence. I've seen it twice in our teams, which are about 10 people per team. And twice I'm sure it's happened more than that, but twice I've seen a little clique develop between two people in both teams. And they were like with like. And that affected the whole team. And it was so detrimental And it was. Now I hope I would step in and sort it by either moving somebody out or calling it out, naming it, and seeing what we can do with that. But I was amazed at how harmful this was, and that they would start to parrot each other's views. And so you ended up with this voice that was actually way louder than 1/5 of the team, became a dominating force, even though it was only 2 out of 10. And that was a real surprise to me. And both of them were detrimental to the team, big time. Big time.
Yeah, and I think sadly that does happen. I think that the key though is to recognise that it's human nature in any kind of community for like-minded people to build connections, and I think that should be encouraged. But as you say, when it becomes negative to the point of it becomes an exclusionary element, or an overtly dominant voice within that community, then that's when it becomes problematic. And I think the way forward to that is, and it kind of speaks to my point around being open and being open to coaching and getting some negative feedback, is actually to address that. I think every member of that team should feel okay to be able to say or to receive feedback saying my behaviour wasn't good. I accept that I get on really well with this individual because we have a lot more in common than I do with anybody else.
Yep.
But it's my responsibility to the rest of the team to avoid circumstances where I think it's important to be able to identify it and address it, but for every member of the team to understand that their responsibilities to the whole community.
Yep.
And again, I sound like a bit of a sort of stuck record, but when I think about a community like this, we all have a social responsibility to everybody, to make sure that everybody is included. And in a way, it's a sort of a subtle, cliques are just a subtle form of kind of elitism or exclusionary behaviour, and whether it's in a small team or whether it's in a community, it's not healthy. So,
I'd push back on the like-minded thing only because we've got a belief in collective intelligence, or bring together people who are like-hearted and not like-minded. And there's a subtle difference, because we encourage people to disagree and to bring their views and to allow space where the teams can all have different views and not dominate, and to change your mind. And changing your mind is so important. Go, okay. And I think it's really important for people to voice their views passionately and strongly, but you don't need to die over them, but I think it's really important for people to put their view forward and go, this is what I think is to be real. And the like-minded thing is just something I push back on, because it's a nice, easy thing to say and go, actually, that's not what we're about. And when you allow a space for different views to be heard, it's amazing what can drop out of that. But you've got to listen.
Yeah, and no, I really like that point of distinction, and I think in a way it sort of talks to what we were discussing around the tennis situation. A healthy space is one in which people can have that dissenting opinion or that sort of differing voice, or and challenge the dominant opinion of the group and feel that they're comfortable and supporting that they can do that. An unhealthy organisation is one in which people either don't feel they can do that, or when they do, they get just put back in their box and they have to conform to the clique. When I reflect back on my career, those occasions when I felt that I've been part of a really sort of high performing team, it's in all honesty, they have been those instances where yeah, we've not all seen eye to eye, or we've not all had the same opinion, or we've not always necessarily felt that this is the focus that we should be focusing on, but we've all felt that we've all had that shared heart, that sort of that passion for ultimately what it is are we trying to achieve here. How are we going to achieve that as best as a team? We will all have different ways in which we can do that, but what's important is that we all work together, because as soon as you lose that, that's when the team starts falling apart. So.
Stu, we're going to have to wrap up sometime this week. What have we missed out? Is there anything that you'd like to bring forward?
I don't know. We have covered an awful lot of ground. That's I think for me, I mean, it's really just to sort of reiterate my own personal view about sort of like looking at the way things work, and whether that thing is the body, whether that thing is an organisation as significant and complex as mine, whether it's a community, whether it's a farm, whether it's a small business, whatever it is, and just to sort of that understanding that everything is interconnected, everything is a system, everything is a machine, for want of a better word. And if specific elements of those machines, those systems, those communities aren't supported, or don't feel that they're working as well as they should be, or aren't performing optimally, then it's like driving a car with squeaky brakes. It's probably still going to get you to where you want to go.
Yep.
Possibly.
Yep.
But it's going to be annoying along the way. In worst case scenario, that's an indicator that there is something really bad about to happen. And so listen to the system. I think so. Listening. Understand the power of stories. Allow people to express themselves. Create spaces where people feel safe to put their hand up and even say things that we don't necessarily want to hear. It's better to hear that one of your prime tennis players, your star player, is not doing well, than to assume that everything is fine and then one day just have them quit or keel over or whatever. So I think so be coachable, listen, and sort of think with your heart, I suppose.
You suppose? that's a very...
I'm trying to think of a deep philosophical way, which for an engineer is very hard. But maybe take the engineer hat off occasionally and allow other parts of ourselves to guide us.
Stu, as an engineer, you're a reasonably interesting fella. Don't want to get too carried away. Stu, thank you so much for this. You've got a competition coming up soon?
Yeah, just over 6 weeks up in Auckland, representing New Zealand at the Pacific Rim Championships.
Wow,
So,
congratulations.
No pressure.
Congratulations. Because you said before we started that you were a bit, am I going to be ready?
Yeah, there's probably a great life lesson in all of this. There's a tendency, I think, when you're prepping for a show like this to see how everybody else is doing, and I'm reminded by the t-shirt that you're wearing. No one's got their shit together. There's a tendency in my sport to look at all my athletes who I'm going to be competing against and assume that they have got everything under control. Because again, what they put on their social media pages is them looking at their absolute best. Yeah. And it's really easy, I think, to be overly critical and not see our own strengths and not realise quite where we are on our journey. And actually, if we just give ourselves that chance, just take a bit of a breather, take a bit of a step back, and actually recognise, do you know what? I'm as prepared as I can be. I'm the best condition that I can hope to be when I step out on the stage, and I'm going to give it my all. And if it's good enough, I'll walk off with a medal. And if it's not, well, give it my best, and that's all you can do.
So
it's going to be fun.
Stu, with this podcast, we put photos of you and I, or a photo of me and you together. Would we be able to put a photo of you, in your gear, doing the bodybuilding?
Almost naked, sure. Why not? Yeah, absolutely.
It would be unique. I've never, and I'm just going to put your photo. I'm not going to do next one.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd be more than happy to kind of give people a bit of a sense of what the sport's all about. Yeah.
I think it'll be epic. Thank you so much. That's very good. Stu, okay, I'm waffling now. Good luck in 6 weeks. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your service to the country. It's important, and I love the work that our armed forces do. I think that, I'm very proud of our armed forces. I'm very proud of our history, and we're little, but we matter. And thank you for this interview.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, team. So there's a golden rule in podcasting: is never take the microphone off, turn it off at the end, keep recording to see what pops out. And so I turn it off, took the headphones off. Stu and I start talking, and he starts mentioning something that is just a really important, significant story, and we've left it out. And I said, mate, I've cocked up here. Would you mind putting the gear back on? Let's go. So, welcome back. And in the unedited version. So, Stu, tell me about the 25 years.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
In 1993, we passed the Human Rights Act, and that outlawed discrimination on a whole raft of human characteristics, one of which was homosexuality. And so 25 years on, we wanted to recognise that milestone and acknowledge how far we'd come as an organisation. So we launched a programme called Pride 25, and it was a series of events and products, if you like, that took place throughout the year. And one of these was called the Rainbow Warriors exhibit. And this started off as what we expected to be a relatively low-key, quite sort of discreet little project that would probably be more of interest to us than to the wider public. But essentially what it was, and we curated an exhibit of 25 fine art photographs of current serving or veterans, previously serving members of the Defence Force who are members of the Rainbow community. These are beautiful photographs taken by an Auckland-based photographer, a guy called Russ Flatt, who's an absolute genius with a camera. And he took these photographs, and they're very simple black and white photographs. Some are quite candid, some are in uniform, some are not. Some are very much sort of regimented photographs of staring right down the barrel of the camera. Others are kind of mid-conversation. Each one was very different, and we arranged for these to be put on display just for a sort of discrete viewing.
And range of ages.
Range of ages. So from contemporary service personnel who have joined in the last few years, right the way through to people who served in the 1960s, 1970s, and that sort of era. What we wanted to do, though, was have more than just the photographs. So we invited each member who was part of the exhibit to provide a small narrative of their journey, their story. And of course, for some of the more junior members of the exhibit, their stories are really encouraging. That they joined in the last few years and life has been great. They haven't received any kind of challenge at all, and they've been embraced and included within their organisation or within their unit. Some of the stories were less enjoyable to read, and some people have, I think, part of the project was around acknowledging what things were like in the past, and some of the stories were really quite heartbreaking around the sort of the treatment and mistreatment of service personnel in years gone by. And I think it's really important, when we're on a journey as we are, to not try and sugarcoat how things were in the past.
Were the stories, the older they were, the more tragic? Was it a direct correlation?
Largely, yeah.
Yeah.
People who served, for example, before the 93 Human Rights Act came through, people who served before the Homosexual Law Reform Act, their experiences were significantly different to the kind of experiences that we see today.
I'm amazed that they stayed in the service. I just cannot believe.
Some didn't, and that, I think, was an important point that we lose and we have lost incredibly talented service personnel because of opinions and views of the time. What was really fascinating about the exhibit was we spoke to the museum who hosted us. This is the Auckland War Memorial Museum. And the intent was that originally it was going to be a sort of an after-hours little discreet reception, just to show off these images and
One
most of the
photo
people-
per person?
One photo per person, so
Okay.
25 people for
Okay.
25 years.
Yep.
And we had the reception, the event sort of moved forward, and then we were approached by the museum who said, look, do you mind if we just keep these up? This is in the main foyer of the Auckland War Memorial. It's an amazing space.
Yeah, beautiful space.
And I mean, absolutely. And so they stayed up for the remainder of the week, and the reception from the public was resoundingly positive. Museums are an amazing space to have these kind of conversations, and it's quite rare to see an exhibit of a sort of a rainbow nature in such a prominent space. But the public really warmed to it. But I think for me, what was most powerful was that it connected the image of somebody who we might have a perception about, whether it's a gay soldier or a transgender sailor or something like that, with who they are as a human being. And by reading their story, understanding their journey, it just brings us just that little bit closer. And to that point around, it's hard to hate up close. The more connected we feel with somebody, the harder it is to have some biases or negative opinions towards them, because we realize actually, despite this one small label that we have attached to ourselves, we still have so much more in common than we do that divides us. And I think for us, it turned out to be a really powerful part of that program. The other another element to the Pride 25 program, and again that I'm extremely sort of proud of bringing it to light, was a story of an Air Force officer, a guy called Peter Rule. Now, many people may not have heard of Squadron Leader Peter Rule. Within the Rainbow community, his name is known because there's a foundation named after him. Peter served back in the 1950s and 60s, essentially was outed and ultimately committed suicide when he was, after he left the organisation. He bequeathed his estate to the Rainbow community, and the Rule Foundation was established. But his story was largely unknown to the Air Force because it had kind of been sort of swallowed up by history. As part of the Pride 25 events, we launched an exhibit telling Peter's story at the Christchurch Air Force Museum, and it was, again, really quite powerful. His sister came along, his former partner came along, so we had a veteran, and again, it was this kind of challenging the perception of who he was as an aviator. This was an incredibly accomplished officer, a very talented pilot, highly respected instructor, who just because of the time and the culture fell foul of the way things were, and he could never reconcile the loss of his career and reputation and everything else, and ultimately made some pretty tragic decisions about that. What I'm really proud of is that his legacy has been picked up by the Defence Force, and now every year we have a Squadron Leader Peter Rule Memorial Award that is presented to the member of the Defence Force who has done the most to contribute towards an inclusive culture within the organisation. And I think that's, to me, we can't change the past, but what we can do is we can learn from those lessons, and we can actually recognise. And I think for many to see photographs of someone like Peter, in his cockpit, flying, on parade with, dignified and with a sword, and it's a far cry from perhaps what people might originally have, their perceptions. But by bringing those details of him to light and bringing them just a little bit closer, breaks down some of those stereotypes. And if we can get something positive from what was a pretty harrowing story, I think that's really important.
I'm just thinking how uncomfortable that must have been with his sister and partner. That would have been incredibly poignant. I
mean, we obviously spoke to them during the in the lead up to, and I think for them there was a sense of pride, I suppose, that the organisation that Peter served in, or a sense of would Peter be proud of what the New Zealand Air Force has become? And I think Absolutely, yes. I think, it's tragic that, people like Peter served in a time when we weren't as embracing and inclusive, but it is really exciting that now, our contemporary, we have youngsters who are coming out at high school, they're out and proud, and they're walking into our careers offices, and they recognise that they can have a full and rewarding career in the organisation. It's not always been that way, but it's who we are now, and for me, that's something I'm really proud of. So,
Stu, thank you. We're going to finish there, and this has been a bonus.